Well, he kind of looks like Fagin out of Oliver Twist, the Charles Dickens story. And he was in that same time period and in that same part of the country. Uh, William Booth, founder with his wife Catherine, they founded the Salvation Army, still bearing good fruit to this day. He was born April 10th in the early 1820s, 29, and he died in 1912 in August. William Booth. I remember I was like a 6-year-old boy, um, mesmerized one Christmas as this big silver truck pulled up to our driveway and backed into our yard, and a couple of guys got out and unloaded some boxes onto our porch. What? Boxes of food and toys. I mean, who are these guys? Well, they were the Salvation Army. My dad had been on a binge, and they stepped in and they helped us out as a family. I remember one Salvation Army service one Sunday morning when my mom had somehow taken us to church, and we were sitting on the front pew, if I recall, and my father had been flopped out at a hotel somewhere nearby from the night before. Unbeknownst to us, or to me anyway, he had been on a drunken binge with a buddy of his, and they had passed out in this hotel room, and Dad had got up early Sunday morning, and it wasn't like now where you could just get drinks on Sunday morning. You had to plan ahead, but they didn't have anything, and Dad went to the sink and washed his face, and he either stood on a stool or leaned on a stool. The next thing you know, I think he was sitting on a stool when it just kind of reeled and he fell. And being in a weak state that he tried to brace himself but couldn't, smacked his face on the floor. His nose broke, blood everywhere, and a mess, just cleaning himself up and getting out of the hotel. Went out the door, down the steep stairs, staggered his way in and out of ditches, down the street, and to the sound of singing. And he saw Salvation Army Church, and he opened the 2 doors and came in. And I remember being at the front. Our family, I guess, had gone up for an altar call. I was holding my mom's hand, or my sister, and I turned around to see my dad walk down the aisle and join his family at an altar, on our knees, then at an altar call. God has gone a great distance in our family to win us unto his purposes. I remember Harbor Lights, Vancouver, another Salvation Treatment Center, outreach center, where my sister Gail and my dad would sing "He Touched Me," and they would tell the story. Dad would tell his story. I also remember Miracle Valley in Mission, and it was an oasis in the black abyss of addiction that my dad would go to. I remember the pool and the cedar building there that was a chapel. After 50 years of helping an estimated 35,000 men out of addiction, in 2010, Miracle Valley shut down, and apparently it's a rumor that there is now a cannabis production facility there, which is rather sad, from one direction to another. But all the good work done with those men, and personally in my family's life, personally for my father, which has then impacted me, started with this one man, William Booth. He was born in Nottingham, England, and he was a second son of a rather fairly wealthy for those times couple, Samuel and Mary Booth. Booth's father was a pawnbroker, and he was, like I said, he was well off. But during William's childhood, they actually entered into poverty, and so he knew poverty as well. His dad couldn't afford school fees, and he ended up apprenticing William Booth at the age of about 13 to be a pawnbroker. And so 2 years into being a pawnbroker, well, his dad died as well, but 2 years into being a pawnbroker, William gave his life to the Lord. And he read extensively. He trained himself in writing and speech, and he really became a local preacher, a local Methodist preacher. And he was encouraged to be an evangelist, primarily by his best friend. His name was Will Sansom, and Sansom and Booth would go and preaching events over the weekends. And in the 1840s, they just began to preach up a storm. Sansom said he was his partner in ministry, and that's what he'd call him. And he said, you should be an evangelist, and he would be the pastor. But Sansom died in 1849 of tuberculosis, and so things changed. William Booth relocated to London, England, and he tried his hand again at pawnbroking, and it turned out that he couldn't shake this call to ministry, the call to preach the gospel, to minister to the lost and the broken. And he tried a few different churches, but he ended up again with the Methodist and became a preacher of the Methodist denomination. And man, they believed in hellfire and brimstone, but that they would be also producing a life of love. And so that would come out in ways, just reaching out to people and caring for people. He also developed a matchbox, producing matches factory. And he paid double the going rate for people so he could get men off the streets and working again. And he had an interesting slogan for his matches. Let's see if I wrote it down here. It said in each matchbox had this slogan on it that said, lights in darkest England, security from fire, fair wages for fair work. And like I said, they paid actually twice as much as anybody else in the going rate for workers. In 1865, he started putting up a tent, and he would be preaching the gospel as revival meetings, and he would come home bruised and battered up and clothes torn because people would throw things at him, bottles and rocks and bricks, but he'd just keep preaching. Wow. And then he started preaching in a warehouse. Street urchins would break the windows with stones, and they would throw fireworks into the warehouse as he was preaching. He would come home tired late at night, but he'd go right back to it the next day. And one time he was dictating this letter, and I can't remember who it was to, but he wrote the words, or he dictated the words, that we are a volunteer army. And his son, Bramwell, said, I ain't no volunteer. I'm a regular. And William Booth thought, that's very true. And so he scratched out the word volunteer and put salvation. We are a salvation army. And thus it was kind of born. The name came about, stuck, and they kind of modeled themselves after the actual military. They had their own flag, and it was called Blood and Fire, or Fire and Blood flag. They would take popular tunes that are sung in the pubs, and they would put Christian words to them. They had their own music, their own uniforms. It really became God's army in a sense. William Booth was called the general, and they had official officers, and then everyone who got saved and was part of it were called soldiers. That was just the way it was. And so every time now you see a person at a Walmart, ringing a bell, think about William Booth. Those early years that were very lean years, but he persevered with the vision to help the needy, help the lost, and they grew and grew with persistence and perseverance till it spread all over the world. And now, even in, like I said, Kamloops, Williams Lake, you'll see the Salvation Army ringing a bell. Would you just give a little bit, because it goes a long way. And when you give, think of people like me. Think of the fruit, and just give $1 or $2, because my family was part of the fruit that was born, produced by the good work of all those people down through the centuries, starting with one man named William Booth, a hero of the faith.